Okay, hi, it's Jolynn from Wild Pony Eventing, and we're here today with Anthem Day from Georgia. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Can you tell us a little bit about your horse story, how you got into horses, your background, and how you got into Mustangs?
Yeah. So I started riding when I was 6 years old. Took my first riding lesson on a little Shetland pony named Pumpkin. And that was pretty much all there was to it. I was just smitten right off the bat. And so then, it was just all things horses from there on out. And I grew up in Douglasville, so there wasn't a lot of choices in barns, but that really wasn't an issue because the barn that I grew up riding in was on the same street that I lived on. So my trainer, got me, I was in regular lessons with her and she was an eventer. And so eventing is pretty much all I've known, dressage and eventing, and it's all I've ever really been interested in.
Yeah.
So I competed extensively when I was, for about 14 years, up until I was about 19 years old. And then, life happens and I stepped away from horses and, just was kind of growing up and trying other things. And, I had a career for a while that I actually decided to walk away from when my mother passed away in 2016. It
What
was
was your
just,
career?
huh?
What was your career?
I was a hairstylist
Okay.
and I worked as an educator for two top brands in the industry. So I traveled all the time teaching other hairstylists.
Ah,
And yeah, so it was a very time consuming career.
okay.
And although there were several times when I wanted to go back to horses, it really wasn't feasible because the hours just did not work well for that. So after my mother passed away, I decided to, really just make a pivot in life and
Mhm.
follow my heart, as, cliche as that is.
Yeah.
That was where I was. So um, I, through friends of a friend, I ended up meeting Rebecca Bowman, and she had North Atlanta Equestrian in Cartersville.
Mhm.
And so I went to work with her full time. And Rebecca had a storefront for the BLM at the time. And uh, so she got me into Mustangs. That would,
Okay.
I had a Chincoteague pony when I was a kid, so maybe that was
Oh,
technically my first Mustang. But it was not the same experience as a adult wild horse,
uh-huh.
But yeah, Rebecca talked me into it. I say she talked me into it. She really gave me very little choice with my first.
Rebecca's a dealer.
Yeah, yeah. She was like, "You're doing a Mustang," and I was like, "I have no idea what I'm doing." And she's like, "It's okay, you'll figure it out." So
Yeah.
I did. I did figure it out. We were supposed to do the the Equine Affair in Ohio in
Mhm.
2020, and that event obviously got canceled due to COVID. So
Right.
it was a virtual event, and we did do the virtual competition.
Mhm.
It was not the best, but we made it to the competition, and then I was able to rehome him.
Who was
But
your Mustang?
hmm?
Who was your Mustang for that first virtual?
His name was Stallone, and he was just a very plain looking little bay Mustang. Nothing really special about him, but he was very challenging. I'm
Uh-huh.
not sure if it was just because I was very unsure of myself and lacked confidence in my approach.
Mm.
But I do think he was also just a fearful little guy,
Yeah.
very, very reactive. So we were both a little terrified of each other. And it was a process, that we got through. We got the tip
Yeah.
training accomplished, and he was rideable. I did not ride him because he was a little guy, but the girl that I rehomed him to, she started riding him immediately and was perfectly
Wow.
fine. So
Wow.
Yeah, it all worked out really well for both of us. But yeah, that is how I got into Mustangs. Was Rebecca said, this is what you're doing. So
So what was that first introduction like? I mean, how would you compare having grown up with domestic horses to that first experience with a wild one?
oh my God, it was petrifying. It really was. I think I was just very intimidated, not by him, but by my lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
I felt very insecure about the process because I didn't know how. I knew what the end goal should be, but I didn't know
Right.
how to get from point A to point B,
Right.
and I had never had any training, any education whatsoever in desensitizing and the very extensive positive reinforcement that you have to use with
Yeah.
wild horses. And I had never had an opportunity before to learn how to work with energy like you have to when you work with a Mustang.
Right.
So, all of those things left me feeling kind of inadequate about the job.
It is amazing. I mean, I went up through the eventing ranks, and until I had Mustangs, I never really understood the whole concept of pressure and release.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's
Yeah.
why that didn't work 10 years ago, or,
Yes, I absolutely do. I mean, you have to. I found the process kind of exhausting at first because I had to be so hyper aware of his energy and my
Mhm.
energy and when
Right.
to take the pressure off, even
Right.
energetically,
Right.
and that's not really something that you're taught when you're
No, it's that
domestic.
subtlety of pressure that's energetic that I think some
Mhm.
people struggle with, but it's a real thing.
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay. So your first introduction to Mustangs was a tough one.
It was. It was. There were several instances where he was determined to get his halter off, and he did
Oh,
over and over again, and I could not get near him to put it back on.
how did he do it?
I have no earthly idea. I mean, that thing was the thing was on, and he kept getting it off, and it just I would have to call a friend to come over who is a little bit of a horse whisperer, and he would come over and just pop it right back on. I couldn't
Uh,
even get close to the horse.
okay.
It was
Wow.
a learning experience.
Okay. But you did it another time.
I did. It was addictive, that connection that I felt. I mean, like the most profound moment for me was when I was able to touch his face, because that first Mustang, he was not having it.
Mhm.
And the moment that I was able to touch his face, our whole relationship changed, and there is something that just speaks to such a primal part of you when
Mhm.
you're able to connect with a wild animal and they accept you and trust your
Yeah.
touch, and I was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I got hooked.
How long was it between your first one and Lucien?
Well, it was not long. Actually, I had no intention of getting another Mustang after I rehomed him. I and not because of just the breed, but because I had a few friends that were planning to do our RP. And so I kind of jumped on that bandwagon. I was like, oh, we're all going to do this, And so
Okay.
I was shopping for thoroughbreds.
Right.
And Rebecca had another load of Mustangs coming in. And yeah, I had not committed to a horse yet. And so this load of 67 Mustangs comes to our farm, and he got off the trailer, and I was floored, I mean, he was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And
Wow.
there was this instant connection. I know it sounds a little like a bit much, but it really was. I felt like a soul to soul connection with him.
Mhm.
and I could not stop thinking about him. And I asked her, you know, because I had not officially signed up for the tip challenge at that point. And I was like, oh my gosh, who's getting that horse? I'm gonna have to follow them on Facebook. And she's like, well, you are if you want him. And like I got butterflies, you know, and I was like, oh well, okay, guess that's what I'm doing now.
And wait, when was this?
So that was August of 2020.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was not long after I rehomed my first one that second load came in, or the last load that she got while she was still in Georgia. And yeah, that was pretty much all she wrote.
So where is he from and how old?
He is from Clover Mountains, Nevada, which is an HMA that I haven't been able to learn very much about, other than it's pretty remote and kind of desolate out there. His paperwork said he was 5 when I got him, but the equine dentist aged him closer to 4. So.
Okay. And what was your process like with him?
Night and day different from the first one. I mean, it could not have been more different. I mean, he was not very reactive at all. I will say that going into it, you know, I had a very different approach because I felt very confident about the approach, you know. So it's, you know, with Mustangs, it's hard to know where you stop and they start, you know what I mean? Because it's so intertwined in the relationship. So I do think that part of it was my confidence, and then part of it was just his personality. He's very accepting of a lot of new things. And so right off the bat, I mean, you know, the only thing he did as far as learning about pressure on the super long lead rope is he kind of half reared up one time. And he was like, oh, never mind. That's enough of that. And, you know, I was like grooming him and fly spraying him by day 3.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, just, he was like, this is great. I've got food. Like, you're clearly not trying to kill me. This is fine. So, yeah.
Wow. And so he was a tip challenge?
He was, yeah. We were going to compete in the Georgia Tip Challenge in November of 2020. And, you know, we ended up finishing in the top 10, which I was thrilled about. You know, I was not that ambitious, but it went really well. So we were able to pull that off. And yeah, I was very, very nervous, but he was just cool as a fan the whole time. You know, he's never been to Chat Hills, and he was just like, looking around, taking it all in, no big deal. And I was like just freaking out, thought I was I was so intimidated to be amongst all these other tip trainers and people, you know, when I wasn't that experienced, but we pulled it off. So
did you go into the challenge knowing you were going to keep him, or did you think he was going to get purchased?
No, I knew from day one that this horse was hopefully never going to leave my side. I have no intention of selling him. Like, I'm realistic about my ambitions with him, but even once we reach my fairly modest goals, like, you know, he does some lessons in my lesson program currently, and I'm just hoping to turn him into a schoolmaster, you know, lesson pony at some point once we get to that point. But yeah, I never had any intention of selling him. I had multiple people reach out to me asking me to sell him, and I turned them all down. So
he's striking. There's just something about him. He's got a presence.
He does. He has a very strong presence. He has a big personality in that little body.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I have only seen pictures and videos of him, and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to follow her.
Yeah, he tends to have that effect on people. I mean, you know, I thought it was just me at first that he had that effect on, but I have come to realize that that's who he is. You know, people are just drawn to him. So
yeah, he's very charismatic. So what are your goals with him, and where are you on that line towards your goal?
So the ultimate goal is I do want to compete him in USEA events. You know, if I that's the biggest goal. I tend to be rather modest in my goals. I hope we can do that successfully together. I feel like we are on that track. It's a little tricky because currently where I'm located, there are no trainers that can really come to me on a regular basis. So I have to travel almost 2 hours for a lesson twice a month. You know, those lessons are going very, very well. We've been riding with Mary Beth Davis since January, and she's done a great job with both of us. But we started, so I started competing him at amoeba level about 4 months under saddle, and he was winning. So then we started doing starter, and, you know, we were reserve champion at the Southeastern Schooling Show championships at the end of 2021. So as a professional, I feel like it's a little tricky for me to keep competing in the lower levels, you know, if he's winning, even though he wasn't perfect, right? And he still had some issues. So I went ahead and moved him up to beginner novice last summer. And we've been doing beginner novice CTs. We've had a couple bobbles towards the end of last year, and crashed into a couple of jumps. So the confidence got rocked a little bit. He's already a cautious guy when it comes to jumping.
Yeah.
So we've took a step back, and we've kind of been, you know, putting all the building blocks back together, and he's doing great. He's been phenomenal cross country schooling recently. So I am hopeful that by the end of this summer, we will be able to get out and do some 3 phases at beginner novice. So.
Okay. And are you shooting for recognized 3-phase or starters?
Not quite yet. I want to be competing him. I want to feel him competing confidently in schooling shows before I try to take him out to rated competitions. You know, I was kind of hoping that we would have an opportunity to even do starter level at a horse trial. That hasn't happened yet, but it's something I would like to be able to fit into my schedule, just to kind of see how he does, you know, give him the taste for what that kind of thing is really like, you know. So
you're area 3, correct?
Yes.
Do they have many starters, or do they have many intro in the USEA?
That's actually what makes it difficult, because the starter level at horse trials in our area tend to be in Aiken or down in Ocala. So I think it's a long drive. You know, we're talking 4 to 6 hours, depending if I'm going to Aiken or Florida. But I think there may be one at Poplar, which is only about a 2.5 hour drive, I think. But as of yet, it just hasn't worked schedule wise.
So what are you doing in the meantime?
Training, and more training. We, you know, his jumping, although he is a very athletic horse, and, you know, it's more of a mental game for him, right? Because he's cautious. So it's like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back with the jumping. The dressage has really progressed in a more linear way. And he is very confidently schooling first level right now. So we are going to definitely do, our next couple shows are going to be dressage only. And we're going to do first level at the next couple of shows, just to see how that goes, you know?
Cool.
So, why not? Doing this for fun. So
yeah. Okay. So what, if any, hiccups have you had along the way gentling him and getting him to be a domesticated horse?
There have been a few. I always joke that he's a little more wild now than he was when I got him.
He realizes the shtick now.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm just like, where did this come from? So even though he was not very reactive when I got him, it does seem like he's gotten more sensitive about certain things. And, you know, he's growing up, he'll be 7 this year. So he's starting to also have more opinions about things. So we did go through a little phase at the end of last year where I became aware that he had ulcers. And during that period, you know, he would come unglued about things, you know, so it wasn't like, oh, I'm just a little uncomfortable. It was like complete meltdowns.
Wow.
And so, but once we addressed that issue kind of resolved itself. It does remind me of one thing though. There was, when I was first teaching him about saddling, he was not opposed to being saddled and tightening the girth. He would freak out when I would take it off.
Huh.
So yeah, that got really tricky because obviously as soon as I would start loosening the girth and he would start freaking out, you know, you have to just yank the tack off. And that was really difficult to deal with for a while. And at one point he pulled away from me and he had on a Western saddle, he got it underneath him, you know, and completely freaked out, bronking around the round pen until he was able to rip it off. And I do think that left some trauma, because there have been instances where if the saddle moves because the girth is not quite tight enough, he gets real anxious, you know, the eyes get big, he gets real tense. And I can see that there is, you know, there's still something in there, but it's just been a process of trying to figure out how can I take his mind off of it? How can I, you know, break the routine and do this differently so that he's not associating, you know, because he's so smart. It's like I'm playing mind games with him all the time.
Yeah. And you don't have any idea what that was about initially?
About taking the saddle off?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that was just his thing. He was never worried about it going on. It was just about it coming off.
Huh.
And it was like that with the Western saddle and the English saddle for a while. He finally got to a point where he didn't react anymore. But there have been moments where I guess something just triggers the memory and he gets real tense, but he's not forgotten it. I can tell you
I'm
that.
sure. Yeah.
You know.
So what do you do to distract him to try to desensitize him a little bit?
Oh my gosh, I play so many games. So the most successful thing I have found is to not keep him tied to the wall. Yeah, if I put the bridle on first and then tack him up in the barn aisle when he's not tied to the wall, there's a lot less anxiety. Also, when we're traveling, if he's at a horse show or we've gone somewhere to go schooling, he couldn't care less. It's like the change of environment. I don't know what it is, but anytime I tack him up anywhere other than tied up in the barn, there's never any anxiety.
Interesting. So he's clearly associated it with the home barn, not just the saddle.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. And then he re-traumatized himself by getting the saddle underneath him that time.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Horses are so fascinating.
Yeah, they really are. I'm like, I feel like I really have to keep up with him. You know, he's not a horse. And this is another reason I could never sell him, is because I know him so intimately that I would never be able to trust somebody else looking after his quirks. You know what I mean? Because he's not dangerous by any stretch of the imagination, but there are things about him that have to be done a certain way. You know, I know I will respect those things. I could never trust that someone else would.
Right. What are some of his other quirks?
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Nothing really comes to mind. It's so minute.
Yeah.
It's just that, there are moments where he has anxiety about things, and it's like, I am aware of it. I recognize it, and I know how to talk to him or walk him or like breathe with him,
Mhm.
to help him just relax from that.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say specifically what those things are, because it's just little things that we kind of encounter on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has he adjusted to being in a lesson program, and what level of riders are able to get on him?
So he has a couple of regular riders. I have a mother-daughter duo that have been riding with me for a couple of years. And the mother has been riding most of her life. And her daughter has been riding since she was an itty bitty girl, and she's 13 now.
Mhm.
So I would say the daughter has ridden mostly schoolmasters, throughout her lessons and her lifetime. Her mother has ridden a lot of different horses and a lot of spicy young horses. So, she's a little more experienced. But they both have a relationship with him and absolutely adore him almost to the same extent that I do. And
Mhm.
so her daughter, while she's really schooling and competing amoeba level in eventing,
Mhm.
um, and her mother is strictly dressage. So she's doing training level dressage with him. And
Mhm.
her daughter is, doing cross rails and little amoeba stuff. And Lucian is just sweet as he can be. He can get a little strong and a little bullheaded with me when we're jumping, but not with her. He just kind of packs her around at a sweet little trot. And I'm like, okay, good boy. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
What a stinker. My Frosty's the same way. If I put a little one on her, she's like, I'd be very careful.
Yes.
She's so kind and sweet, will not do the things she will do to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Like he does none of the things that he does to me with her. And
Yeah.
he will try it with her mom though. He can be a little mischievous with her. Like sometimes he'll just casually try to drag her back to the barn out of the arena.
Casually, though.
Yes, casually. Like he doesn't make a run for it. He just kind of starts pushing the shoulder out of the arena towards the barn. Yeah, he's a funny guy.
Okay. Do you have plans for another Mustang?
So the answer is definitely yes. Is there a particular Mustang? No. Over the last couple of years, I have inquired about a couple of different Mustangs that really caught my eye.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the barn where I'm at, since it was taken over by different management after Rebecca left, they are not real keen on having fresh Mustangs on the property,
Okay.
because they are a liability and they can cause damage and that kind of thing. And you just never know what you're going to get. So what I have been considering is getting one that has been tip trained or, has even been just barely started under saddle,
Mhm.
that just has some manners and some understanding about how to be a horse,
Yeah.
in a domestic situation.
Mhm.
So we'll see. Rebecca had the most amazing Mustang for the Fort Worth show. And
Oh, yeah.
oh my gosh, I would have done anything to have that mare. She was amazing.
Yeah. A little Palomino. Was it a
Yeah,
Palomino? Yeah.
yeah, she's a Palomino. She was gorgeous,
Yeah.
stunning.
Okay. But she went for quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I think 10.5
Yeah.
actually was what she went for. So I mean, I do think that my next Mustang will be on the bigger side, but then the challenge is to find one that's not too heavy boned because,
Yeah.
once they get over 15 hands, they start looking like, very drafty. So
Yeah. So now that you're a little further into your Mustang journey, do you have a process in mind, or do you have methods that you prefer?
Oh, I by no means consider myself an expert at Mustangs because I mean, every single one is so different. And
Yeah.
that's one thing I hear echoed by all Mustang trainers,
Yeah.
it's like they're all different, they're all individuals. But I will say that I do feel confident about my abilities to train another Mustang, regardless of what the temperament, turns out to be. I feel like I have the necessary tools to see that through, and I know that they will come around, even if you have a difficult one, or
Yeah.
fearful one. It's just about patience, and I also feel like I have fine-tuned that ability to interact energetically with
Mhm.
a horse,
Yeah.
especially a Mustang, a wild Mustang. And that is, I feel like, the most important skill set is,
Yes.
understanding how to interact with that animal in a non-offensive way, and how to gradually creep into their bubble without, completely freaking them out.
Yeah.
And that takes, you have to really be able to read those nuances in the body language and
Mhm.
facial expressions and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I do feel capable because of that experience I've had with these two.
Okay. So if people want to follow your journey and see what happens with the next one, how would they do that?
Well, I am fairly certain it would definitely be on my business page, Anthem Eventing LLC on Facebook. And currently, my Instagram and TikTok are fully devoted to Lucian's journey. But
We
but
like
if
that. We
another
like that.
Mustang shows up in our life, they will have their own spots on there, I'm sure. So on Instagram, it would be an Anthem Day Eventing, and on TikTok is Anthem Day One.
Okay, great. Well, Anthem, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing what you and Lucian do in the future, especially this season in your
Yes,
eventing.
I'm very excited. Thank you so much.
All right.